Welcome to the Mind Your Autistic Brain talk show, the talk show for late identified autistics, where each week you will hear the autism journey of another late identified person, including the hardest part, the best part, and insights they share just for you. So you know you are not alone on this journey, my friend. Find your person and community here each week. And don't miss these special editions of Creator Spotlight and Hot Topic with your hostess with the mostest, Social Autie. That's me, Carole Jean. Let's get started. Welcome to Mind Your Autistic Brain. Last week, I surprised you with my guest, Sophie Manovich, who is a researcher and non-autistic individual. Okay, I'm doing it again. Just telling you guys, I am totally surprising you all over the place. So today I am very, very excited to introduce Dr. Ali Arena. She's a therapist based out of Los Angeles, California. She does online work, guys. So if you don't live in LA, you can still schedule appointments with her. She is fantastic. She specializes, and I even hate to use that word, but she really does take time to listen and really come from the perspective of what is it that my autistic clients need? How can I serve them? She specifically looks at not just autistic adults, but autistic couples. Guys, welcome Dr. Ali Arena from Dr. Ali Arena Communications.
Thank you, Carole Jean. I'm so happy to be here.
I know. Listen, we found each other on Instagram. I love the gram. It is the best place to meet some of the most amazing people. And I connected with you. Last night, you had this incredible interview that you did with Rachel, who is also autistic, and she is a therapist and clinician. And oh my gosh, just like the insights and the things that you guys were sharing on that was fantastic. And I'm going to make sure I drop that in the show notes, guys, because you want to go check this out.
Yeah, that was amazing. And that's also why I love Instagram. I met her on Instagram, and she's Rachel Dorsey, the Autistic SLP. And I found her because I was reading also a magazine for speech therapists, and she had a whole article in there. Really cool, all about autism acceptance and neurodiversity at work. So she is pretty amazing. And her blogs, if you want to check her out, are really good too. But also, when you and I talked, I got such gems of wisdom in that conversation. So I love speaking with autistic individuals because it just informs me so much better to make sure, I'm never doing anything that could be harmful, unintentionally, of course, but just making sure I'm listening and I'm aware.
So, Ali, share with us how you became interested in and began specializing in neurodistinct adults and couples. I mean, you yourself are not. So how did you get here?
Right.
What brought you to this world?
I know. So my background is in speech therapy, and I was always drawn to working with autistic children. And from that, I really found like I was drawn to the social part, probably because I can be awkward. And so I really empathized with that social struggle. And also, I think we take for granted that in the autistic community, we explicitly teach social skills, right? We break it down. We don't do that for neurotypical people. And there's plenty of neurotypical people who aren't seeing hidden rules either, and who are doing things that are just sort of odd at times. So I found that really interesting, how there's this whole dialogue about breaking stuff down that I only saw when speaking and working with autistic individuals. So I got really interested in that. And then from there, I started working with teenagers and adults who would ask me about dating. And I realized pretty quickly that no one was really talking to them about this, or their sources were maybe porn or like a Disney romantic movie, which although is lovely, isn't normally reality once you're really in a relationship, right? So it was just, there wasn't a lot of talk about it. So I went back and I got my doctorate, and I looked at dating on the spectrum. And the whole time I also journaled about, well, what do I think is difficult? And of course, I thought communication, because I, am biased to think communication, which yes, some autistic individuals definitely put that, but it was a lot broader and made me realize that like there are a lot of similarities in what everyone struggles with when finding a relationship, like boundaries, confusion about what the progression is of a relationship, how, like, are we hooking up? Are we dating? When do I meet their parents? Right? All that. And then the anxiety and rejection. So all of those things were kind of the bigger components. So after I finished, I started working more and more with individuals. And then I later found something called the Neurodiverse Couples Counseling Institute, and was certified through them, and now have started working with couples. So I guess I don't really know why I'm just drawn to it. I love it. I enjoy it. And I think I have ADHD, and I think it's like no autistic person is the same. Every session is different. So it's nothing ever feels repetitive to me. And then I think additionally, there's been this huge neurodiversity movement, especially through pandemic. And that's been really interesting, and also not difficult is not the word, but it's been impactful, because every time something comes out or I have a conversation with an autistic individual, I'm like, oh, that's something I didn't think about at all. Now I need to maybe add that into what I'm doing therapeutically. So that's also been fun. And then at times an ego check of like, okay, I need to constantly be looking at everything holistically. And I think that's a really fun way to think about working with anyone.
Well, I mean, Allie, you're neurodistinct. I mean, you're in the pool with the rest of us, girl. I mean, that is some insight right there that really adds to not the understanding, but the knowing.
Right.
And that's a totally different thing. You can read and study all day long and understand the concept of swimming, but until you get wet and you try it, you don't know. So having that perspective really helps. And I love that you, sort of said you check your ego. I mean, gosh, just as humans, we all have to do that. We all get so entrenched in our rightness about, how we see things or how we understand something to be, that we can miss the greater opportunity or the deeper insight. So I love, this is why I love talking to you. This is why I'm so glad you're here. When you said yes, I was like doing the happy dance. Seriously. So as we're moving, and we're in May, which is Mental Health Month, and the whole reason I wanted to feature you, because I'm like, look, one of the biggest struggles, the biggest challenges that so many of us in the neurodistinct world face is finding a decent therapist. Oh my gosh. Okay. So like my friend Mara and Rita have Not So Typical Talk podcast. Rita has got this rockin' awesome therapist. And every time she talks about her, I'm just like, God, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. It's just, and so many of us are just like, there is the horror show, right? Everybody has these horror tales about how they've gone to this therapist, what the therapist has said. I mean, I've got people in my community. It is heartbreaking. And it's just like, wow, how can you ever even imagine trying to treat another human being and you just said something incredibly hateful, hurtful, or just dismissive of another human, and you're supposed to be helping, right? So that's like when I found you and all these other types of things that you do, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, we so have to talk to Allie. We got to showcase
I appreciate that. No, I've heard that from people I've worked with too, just like a lot of dismissal of things that don't feel like a big deal maybe to the therapist, but for that individual really is something big. And I used to teach a lot, like size of the problem, like, is this a little problem or a big problem? And I'll reference it sometimes, but I actually realized when I did it to myself, I'm not that good if I'm stressed about identifying the size of the problem. Like, if something's happening in my relationship, it can feel like a fire is, ensuing in my household, but it's not. It's like, we didn't communicate about picking our dog up from daycare or something. But to me, it feels really large. So I think, again, just taking that reality check and being like, I teach this and I know the tool, but I can't always apply it immediately.
Well, I mean, that's just a totally human thing.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's just a totally human thing. And, for those of us with alexithymia, just being able to, and sort of like what you and Rachel talked about last night, because this was sort of like a big aha thing that I had in my
Mm-hmm.
journey once I discovered I was autistic, was to go, oh, what I was identifying based on what sort of the external world was telling me I was experiencing wasn't this emotion. It was actually this, and being able to like find the subtleties, because sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
fear and excitement feel the same in your body. So being able to try and put those two things together and then also separate them based on the circumstance isn't always an easy thing to do if you don't even know it's happening, right?
Right. Right. Well, and if
So,
you aren't feeling in your body yet, or you have just one feeling in one place that's so large that you're not even aware of maybe the other sensations. Um, yeah, I do a lot of emotion wheel work, and not like this is this feeling, right? Like not identify, but more like there's actually a breadth of feelings that you could be having, and they're not all negative. I find that a lot, that the individuals I work with attribute a lot more of what they're feeling to a negative thing, where it might actually be like, I think you're that uncomfortable right before you're happy, like you're about to have something happy happen, but they'll kind of shut it down as a negative feeling, because for so long, I'm sure they did attribute that to feeling something negative.
well, that, and sometimes, like for myself, it would be, I would feel emotions. I feel emotions so deeply, so
Mm-hmm.
intensely that it can be scary. And that sensory overwhelm of those physical responses. And it's like, it can be very scary because you're like, whoa, why am I feeling like it's almost this out of control feeling because it comes on really strong, even if it's a good, excited feeling. And so you're like, well, I got to suppress that because I'm not geared to handle that because I don't know what that is. Or, it feels like a threat because, our brain is always seeking to protect us first, first and
Yeah.
foremost. So the brain's like, whoop, nope, shut that down. And that becomes part of your automated response as an undiagnosed, unidentified autistic person. So when you discover that you're autistic and you start to realize and recognize all of these things about yourself when it comes to sensory, and then you start to really connect with and sort of allow yourself to identify what's going on in your body, then you start to sort of see it when it comes and you're like, whoo, and you catch yourself in that automated response of wanting to just to shut it down. And you're like, no, I'm going to see where this goes. I'm safe. And that's, you have to remind yourself in that
Mm-hmm.
prefrontal cortex in your logical brain, I'm safe. It's okay. Let's just sort of explore this. And just having that awareness to know that you can explore that sort of overwhelming emotion and feeling in your body to see where it takes you is such a huge discovery for so many of us who maybe have gone for 40 or 50 years or more just trying to suppress it because somewhere we've heard a story that we're supposed to have this sort of even level keel and this is what our emotions
Mm-hmm.
are, and we're not supposed to be up or down in any extreme, yet that's how we experience it.
Well, and I think you brought up a really interesting point too, that I feel like I do educate a decent amount on in neurodiverse couples sometimes is, there's still that sort of, dumb idea out there that people who are autistic don't have empathy. But what you kind of just talked about too is it's actually the opposite. Like I'm so empathetic and I'm feeling so much of your emotion that it might look like I'm shutting down because I'm not sure, what to do with it. But it's not that I'm unaware of it. It's not that I'm not feeling it for you. And I that shows up a decent amount in relationships. And I don't think the autistic individual always has the vocabulary to say like, oh no, that's actually what's happening. I understand what's happening for you. I just can't, in that moment, I'm not able to express it. And then the partner seeing it as you're dismissing my feelings, right? Like you're not taking in how I'm feeling at all. So that's a
Right.
big mismatch I see.
It really is. I see that as well. And the other part of that too is just the processing speed differences.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's like sometimes, you know, someone will want me to respond or react like right in that moment. And not knowing before, it caused so much tension and friction and misunderstanding and a lot of hurt feelings on both sides. Like I recently had a conversation with my sister, and she's younger than me, and she is not neurodistinct, but I think she might be, those kind of things. We come from the same parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she calls me, she tells me something, and it was like a huge shift in our plans, a huge shift in what was happening. And so my brain immediately kicked into problem solving mode. And I'm running through all the different things in my head while she's talking, and I'm listening to her, and she's wanting me to like tell her everything's okay and I'm fine and I'm not upset. And I'm like, I even said, I need some time to process this because I just made all these plans and just made all these reservations that I've already paid for. And this is a huge out of nowhere information. I was like, so give me a minute, let me process this and I'll get back to you. And, my sister needing me to be okay with it, just like, okay, but are you sure? Kept going into it. And then I was like, listen, I need to go. Let me go process this and just give me a few minutes and I'll get right back to you. Right.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, it just the penny didn't drop on her end, even though, my gosh, we know each other for 45 years. It still happens in these really long-term relationships because you've had these patterns of behavior for so long in that relationship that, as the other person is becoming aware and changing and addressing and being able to verbalize for the first time, hey, I need a minute. You still haven't quite learned how to respond on your end either, because it's a two-way street, right? So she starts texting me, not just text, but then she like Facebook messages me, and I'm just like, girl, I love you, but back off for 2 seconds. Let me breathe. I'm autistic, okay? Give me a minute. Just give me a minute.
Well, and I think you're also showing, like a partner also has to get to a place where they're trusting of when you say I need a minute, it's not necessarily negative. It's honestly like a neutral, like I need a minute. Maybe I'm going to come back annoyed. I'm not sure, but I literally haven't even processed it. But I could totally see for someone else, especially if they in no way want to hurt you and they, love you, that being like, well, she needs a minute. She's obviously really mad. And now I need to, and also learning for people. So for me, if I'm frustrated, if someone was texting me more, I'm like more frustrated with you. I'm like, no, I don't want to talk to you now at all.
Well, it's just
but
I would say, I'm not frustrated. I'm not upset. I just need to process the information. I even said this, right? But it just truly goes to just the human response that we all have to respond from our own needs.
Yeah.
And I recognized, when I did get off the phone with her and I got that first message, I'm like, she really needs to know. And I really need to assure her that I'm not upset, that I'm okay, because she wants everything to be right. Her heart was in the right place and she wanted, she wanted the trip to be good and all this kind of stuff. So I just shot her a quick message back and I'm like, I promise I'm okay. I'm not upset. I'm just problem solving and it takes me a minute. So don't fret. Don't freak out. Don't have a, complete spin out on me. It's okay. And you got to trust me when I tell you it's okay.
That is some really good communication. I don't think
look, this is so new, Allie. Like,
there
is no patting on the back. This is 40 plus years of learning.
Right.
And really in the last 7, just since learning I was autistic, because I didn't know what my communication challenges and differences were.
Right.
To even address them. Just knowing what they were. Ooh, that has been a life changer.
I've heard that from everyone. Yes, like helping to, show the two sides of a situation. But like one of the people I work with, she kept getting reviews at work that she didn't listen and that she wasn't collaborative, right? And we were talking one day and she started to look up and turn away. And I was like, what are you doing right now? And she was like, I'm thinking about what you're saying. And I was like, do you do that often? And she was like, yeah, I do that a lot. And I was like, okay. So other people are probably, and I actually know you're not ignoring me because she's wonderful and pays attention and is so great in sessions. But other people are probably perceiving that as like, you're looking away, you're ignoring what I'm saying. And I was like, what if you started to say to people, I'm sorry, I'm looking away, I'm just processing? That little sentence made such a shift in her work community. Like they were very receptive to that sentence. They just thought she was ignoring them the whole time.
Right.
Like,
Because there are these stories that we tell
yes,
ourselves
yes,
about someone else.
yes.
And it's so easy to do that without, and that's one of the things, not knowing, because yes, we're all painfully aware that our physical communication, our nonverbal communication is just as loud as our spoken communication. And just being able to, because we don't have those, mirror neurons, we're not looking at ourselves, we're looking out at the world. So just being able to reflect and identify, what is my physical communication language? What is that? And not having to change it because there's nothing wrong with it, but just being able to communicate it and convey it to the people that you care about and the people who are being, in relationship with you, so that they understand what your physical communication style is and you can understand theirs because they have one too.
Well, and I think that's what, when speaking with Rachel Dorsey, and I brought this up last night because I just think she said it so beautifully. Like, there's autistic communication styles, there's neurotypical communication styles, there's everything, right? Like, my fiance is an engineer. That's definitely a different communication style. And none of them are bad. None of them are better. They're literally just, that's what they are. And if you realize there's a mismatch, that's where you come together to figure out the mismatch. And I feel like that really is what neurodiversity is supposed to be, right? Just respecting that everyone's brain and people communicate differently. But yeah, I feel like just being able to point that out, obviously in a very gentle way. I think that's important as a therapist too, not to make it like, what are you doing right now? Because that's weird, right? Like, not pointing it out like that, but sort of inquisitively.
I'm gonna leave crying.
Yeah, like inquisitively be like, what's happening for you right now? Because, and then, again, this is why rapport is so important. Because to me, I could see how someone could interpret this. Because I've also heard that from individuals that I've worked with that, they've been told that they're doing something and it comes across mean. And that's been not just upsetting. Obviously, no one wants to be mean, but then they'll go back and think of every other instance where they've possibly acted that way. So it's like a compounding, almost like sensory anxiety overload. So that was something that I think that's so important for other therapists to know too, that like, we might just be saying a statement sort of neutrally, right? Like, oh, it might be perceived this way, but to be aware that if there's any history of a person being told that at some point, it might bring back all the other instances of that. And I hadn't thought about that really. So that was a huge one to sort of make part of my practice.
Ooh, Allie, I love we're talking today, because the topic in my Autistic Brain community this week is our stories.
Oh, okay.
And it goes so deep because it's that earlier stories that we learn from like age 5 to age 8. In that window, everything around us, all the people around us tell us how to interpret the world and ourselves. So we have this story. And when you're late identified, you've got to, and it was one of the biggest things in my journey that I developed for myself as part of the unveiling method was, what are the stories that I'm telling myself today that I've been carrying with me since childhood that no longer serve me or that just aren't true?
Right. Okay.
And, when you go into a response, because, you have this emotive response when somebody says, gosh, somebody said, gosh, you're stupid. I'd be like, okay, whatever. And it wouldn't faze me. But if I agreed to that story and I believed it, because somewhere along the line, somebody told me I was stupid and I agreed and believed it. So then I incorporated that. So I've been telling myself and living my life from that perspective and with that story that I'm stupid. So when you tell me that, it's going to hurt my feelings and I'm going to feel less than. And then all the times that anybody ever said it, all the emotions come flooding back in. Like you say, it's this compounding response. So instead of just going, yeah, whatever, I might have a completely different response if I believe that. And one of the things that I really love and started to incorporate, and it's one of the things that we've been talking about this week, is when you have a miscommunication and somebody says something that upsets you or hurts your feelings, or just doesn't sit with you in a way that you feel like you've lost, something's not connecting. You're not getting what the other person's saying, or maybe you're taking it in a way they didn't intend. And being able to respond versus react is to reframe that. And I love Brene Brown teaches this. She says, okay, the story I'm telling myself right now is that you're saying I'm stupid because, I did something really, absent-minded or whatever, and that you don't trust me, that you don't believe I can do things. That's the story I'm telling myself. You might have called me stupid, but this is all the other stuff, the story that's coming with it. Is that what you meant? Am I totally off the mark? And that's not an easy thing to do, because if you have gone unidentified as autistic your whole life, we have done nothing but try and not have any conflict. We've tried so hard not to, we're people pleasing to the nth degree, trying to get it right. And so getting that vulnerable, getting that brave to ask that question is a huge shift. But it's one of those shifts that when it happened in my life and when I've watched other autistics start to embrace that and use it in their life, that's the game changer.
It's so huge. And the step before that, to even realize that separation of, oh, wait, all this stuff is coming up, but that person actually just said to me, I don't know, hey, you forgot to shut the cabinet door. But for me, what came up is like, you think I'm dumb, you think I'm not going to get anything done, you think whatever, right? The dialogue of, but some of us, like, it's so enmeshed that we can't even pull the thought apart. So being able to pull that apart is such a skill in itself. And normally, if you're vulnerable enough, the person's like, no, I just literally meant you didn't shut it. Could you shut it next time? Like, it's not.
Right. Or could you shut the cabinet because the last time you left it open, I hit my head on it. It really hurt. I mean, something totally like that.
Yeah. Like, just an honest, just like, no, I didn't mean to cause any harm to you. I'm just saying, can you please shut it? Right.
And I love this because the more conversations that we have about this and the more that we share just sort of how we've experienced this same thing in our lives, let somebody else know they're not alone and that it's okay and that there is another way to try something and that there is a different way to approach communication than maybe the stories that we've learned early on.
And you know what has been coming up for me is I feel like direct communication sometimes gets a negative connotation, right? Especially in women, we could be called other things for being direct, maybe.
Right. Good one.
Right. But what we're really talking about is being direct, kind, but direct, right? Like, okay, wait, this is coming up for me right now. Is this what you mean? Or is this what you mean? I think that's where, when you're in, kind, loving relationships and friendships, that's so much easier to do. That might feel really hard in a board meeting. I don't even know if I could do that, to be honest. But in in a relationship, I think that's so important, because I think there are plenty of friends that I have that I probably could have a little bit more honest conversations, but there's a little bit of that fear of directness.
Yeah. And it also kind of falls into one of the questions you have to ask yourself when you're in a relationship or you're seeking that true connection relationship. Is the other person capable of? Do they have the capacity and the skills to reciprocate this type of communication? And sometimes when you venture out into that, you don't know if they do.
Mm-hmm.
And when you approach from being direct or being vulnerable and sharing some of those things, sometimes you have to also take into account and remember that the other person, if you're changing up how you've always communicated and it's different, they're going to put on the brakes, and it might be just or feel a little scary for them. And so in the moment, they may not know how to respond to that. So sometimes, the first response you get isn't necessarily what their skill set or capacity is to be in reciprocation for that, but also just sort of give them time to process and come back to you to say, I really appreciate or acknowledge that you were being really vulnerable and open with me, and I didn't really know how to respond to that right away because it was new, or I was feeling different in myself, and I didn't know from my perspective how to meet that because it was scary for me. And just letting somebody know, hey, I'm trying something different. This is something I've never done before, but you're an important person to me in my life, and I want us to have a deeper, more vulnerable and honest connection. So I'm going to share this with you in the hopes that you'll be able to reciprocate in kind in this type of relationship conversation. But if you can't right now, it's okay. I want you to know I understand, and I'm going to give you that space to kind of process it. Because you can't demand,
No.
response.
Well, and I talk about this a lot. Like, you need to give people grace. People need a second to process what you're saying, to understand maybe that, you're basically setting a new boundary, right? And on the other side of that boundary, there's a person typically, and that person might have a reaction. It might not be great, or it might be a reaction kind of like you're saying that's neutral. I don't know how to respond. And you don't know what your new boundary could be, triggering in them. Like, for all you know, you setting that is hitting a childhood wound that you didn't even know your friend had. So it just takes a second. You got to give everyone grace. I say that a lot with all the movements that are happening in our country right now, which are amazing, pro movement in every way, but giving people a second to process and understand and ask honest questions and hold that space for a little, and then expect people to move forward, but just to hold the space for a little bit.
Yeah, because, I think that's one of the things that's been a big blessing to me is not just opening up that grace and that space and extending it to other people, but extending it to myself in the process. Mm-hmm. Because it's so often that we are so willing to give to everyone else, yet we withhold from ourselves.
Oh, and so true. And
there's such peace and freedom in giving that to yourself and acknowledging that you're worthy of that.
Right. And you brought up the people pleasing that is so chronic in most neurodiverse individuals, I think, right? Because at a young age, you probably learned like, oh, I did that wrong. I should correct that and try to avoid ever having that happen again. And I just think it's, and being a woman, I think when you add that in, it's 2 layers of extra people pleasing. And it's not until you're later in life, or maybe you start going to a therapist, that someone even says that word to you. Because for me personally, I was like, I'm not a people pleaser. I'm really nice. Like, that was my default, right? I'm really
That's
nice.
really
That's
good.
I don't do that. But in reality, I'm so nice that I don't take care of myself, which isn't a good quality. It's not the best quality. Taking care of yourself is really important. So I think that's a journey for a lot of people.
Well, Allie, one of the things that I really admire about you is that you go out into the autistic community and you ask questions. I love it because you are constantly seeking this deeper knowledge. You don't want to just understand it. You want to know, as best you can. You're jumping in the water and you're swimming, girl. And I love that. So what are some things that you found as a therapist that you've been incorporating into your practice to help your autistic clients?
So again, learning more, like one person I was talking to really explained this well. She had to clean out her closet, and her mom was like, just get rid of your jeans. Like, your jeans don't even fit. Like, why is this a thing? And she finally explained it in a way that I was like, whoa, for her, each pair of jeans had a distinct memory. And she was saying that happens with a lot of objects. Like objects hold memories. And I was like, okay, that's very different for me. Like, I think I remember the first time I bought designer jeans because like I had money to buy them. But since then, I don't remember anything really about my jeans or my clothes, or, you know, it's kind of like I wear them. But I was like, okay, so that's really different. And I was like, your mom's probably not seeing that at all, because I don't think she thinks that way about objects. So it's a different conversation. But then also still helping her get rid of, you know, because we don't want it to become hoarder level, right? So still there's a dynamic there, but that different lens was really helpful. And then also the introception, so the identifying where feelings are in your body, really getting specific about that. That's not something I was incorporating initially because, again, I went right to communication. But where does communication start? Typically non-verbally, right? And with ourselves. So if we're not aware of how our body is presenting or what's even happening in our body. And I see that, you know, a lot of the men I work with, a complaint of their spouse may be that they go from 0 to 60. And with it, for me, I can see them go from 0 to 20 in this session, and 0 to 30 and 0 to 40, but they're not, I can tell they're not feeling it. So that's been a lot of work. And I think I just had a thought and it totally left my brain about one more thing that I've been incorporating. Oh, this was something I was talking with Daniel Jones from Aspie World. And he was saying, you know, a lot of therapists have told him to meditate, which I do feel like is kind of a default. And again, you know, I have to take my own advice when I say it. I don't really like meditating. But what works for me is to go on a walk and either listen to classical music or a podcast that's kind of like a trashy podcast. There's no thought, right? It's just sort of I'm walking. And actually, when I was talking to him, he was like, that's been how I do therapy. Like I'll walk and talk to my therapist. So I've started to incorporate, if you want to walk and talk with me, it's fine. You can turn your camera off if we're not doing any, you know, like nonverbal communication. If they want to kind of get some body work, we will keep the camera on. But just sort of, again, expanding those boundaries and being like, well, why do you have to sit and talk with me if you're actually more effective walking? Yeah,
I love that. You know, that's one of the really big things that we do in the Mind Your Autistic Brain. You know, we talk about meditation, but we also talk about the 7 forms of rest. And one of those is the active form of physical rest. And, you know, that is also sometimes, especially those of us who are ADHD and we've got these really high energy engines, I've got to expel that in some way in order to focus. So yeah, my meditation is my run, you know, go for a walk, those types of things. And I think that has to really, you as a therapist, but also just as an individual, be able to have that freedom to go, my meditation looks different than this textbook picture. You know, I'm not going to sit there and go, you know, that just totally, I would go nuts. I have tried it. It does not work. It makes me a wreck.
Yeah. Right.
It makes it worse.
I don't like a mask. I don't want a face mask. Like, you know, that's kind of self-care a lot of times. Like that actually feels really sticky to me. I don't like that. Right. That's okay. Yes.
And it's totally good. And just finding it and experimenting, like being the scientist in your own life and knowing that yours doesn't have to be like everybody else's. You know, I say I show up as the scientist in my lab coat every day. And at the end of the day, my question to myself is, what have I learned more about myself today than I knew yesterday?
Ooh, that's so good. What a good journal prompt.
That is my journal prompt.
Scientist of I really like that.
Think about it. When you are in science mode, when you're in scientist mode and you're in your lab coat, you're not judging. You're just letting the data come to you. You're just observing. You're experimenting. You're trying new things to see what the outcome is.
Right.
You know, yes, we have these predictive behaviors and we can, you know, these predictive ideas and we can think of what might happen, but we don't really know till we try. So kind of giving yourself that freedom, that grace, and that space to just be a scientist in your own life. I've tried more things, I've learned more things, and I've let go of more broken things because I just tried it.
I love that. Yeah, it's such an objective. I'm a to-do list hoarder and an idea hoarder. And really, I think if I just put on that scientific lens, I could easily be like, Allie, you haven't done that in 3 months. Like, you're not doing it. Or just say you're not doing it till 2022, right? Like, physically move it out of your space.
Okay, so I have a bit of an office supply obsession. Are you a Post-it note girl?
Oh my gosh, everywhere. I mean, look, right here, just words. It's so bad.
I have my index cards, my color-coded stuff. Okay, cool. We're in good company.
Yes. All the journals, all the planners.
Oh my gosh, I collect journals.
Yeah. And then planners, I buy all the time and don't actually
use them.
Yeah.
Okay, you're not alone. And I just decided it's totally cool that I do that because, I can cut them up and reuse them as something fun later in an art project.
There you go. Yeah.
It's just one of those things. So, Allie, as we're wrapping up, from a therapist perspective, what is the biggest piece of insight or knowledge that you've gained that you would like to share with another therapist and also with an autistic adult?
I really think it's listen and sort of see if you can apply what someone's saying to yourself or to your relationship. Yes, obviously there are therapeutic tools to use in couples therapy, but are people saying things that you are like, oh, I do that too. Maybe there is something here that it's just a communication mismatch. It's not the autism. Like, this is simply just a communication mismatch. And I think for autistics, I just think it's wonderful that everyone's really talking about what works and doesn't work, because autism there's a lot we still don't know, right? There's a lot we do know, but there's also a lot we're not even sure what's totally happening in the brain. We're not sure how much is connected to the gut, right? There's just so much unknown. And I think the more adults are open about like what worked and didn't work, and there's kind conversations about it, about saying, I did this as a child and this didn't help me, or this actually hurt me as a child, right? I think those conversations need to keep happening, just in a way that's respectful of both parties when the conversation's happening.
I love that. And it's why I'm so glad and so thankful you were here today. So if you guys are on Instagram, go check out Connecting with Dr. Allie. You can connect with Allie Arena. She's also online and offers sessions that way. So be sure, if you've been looking for a therapist, if you really need somebody, I highly recommend Allie. She is listening, she is learning, and she's neurodistinct too, just in a different way. And that's okay, because we know that we all come in different colors, different shapes, different communication styles, different cultures, different languages, and we are all seeking one thing: connection.
It's so true.
We're all seeking connection. And we're doing it from a place of kindness, gentleness, patience, and understanding in the Mind Your Autistic Brain, not just with each other, but with ourselves. Guys, I'll see you next week. Maybe I'll have another surprise. Thanks, Allie.
Bye.
If you are someone who likes to help people and share what has made a difference in your life, please share this talk show with a friend and on your social media accounts so that you can be the blessing in another late identified autistic's life. Be sure to tag me at Social Autie so I can personally say thank you. And to help keep the talk show ad-free, please consider becoming a one-time or recurring supporter through either Buy Me a Coffee or the Anchor podcast links in the show notes below. I truly appreciate your support. Thank you for being a listener, and thank you for adding your voice to our story.